You know, they can stay in the shade if you want. It's good social distancing.
I guess just monitoring it there. Good to see you.
Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. And so, to give folks a little bit of an overview, obviously we want to comment and talk about everything that's going on in our country and in our city. And we also, in these times, have to talk a little bit about Corona. So at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to hear from our Chief of Police. We're also going to hear from our our CAO, Sarita Nair. That's, of course, the civilian in charge of our police department, as well as the city. And we're also going to hear from our COO, Lawrence Rael. So I think there's a lot of things to go through. And, you know, if possible, of course, we want to be able to take what questions we can. Let me begin by stating I think that, you know, all across America, we are seeing powerful voices. Millions of people rise up and take the streets to demand racial justice. We're also seeing a powerful moment of change be contradicted by violence. And you can see, we're going to talk about what happened down here, some of the things that have happened already to our downtown. But I want to be clear that the protesters in our city are not the ones causing the harm and damage and putting lives at risk. Unfortunately, small groups of agitators are distracting and convoluting from the message the protesters are trying to convey. And in our city, we are seeing this same dynamic. And unfortunately, it is doing nothing but, of course, hurt our city, hurt the very business owners, the very city that we're trying to make better in every way, including with respect to racism and social justice. So many hours after our city joined together in a powerful and peaceful candlelight vigil, a protest and a march, a small separate group of people started vandalizing and destroying many local businesses and historic locations that make up downtown and also Edo and Nob Hill. An especially heinous assault on our residents' businesses that were already struggling because of the corona pandemic. Gunshots were fired at police. The chemo theater nearly burned. You can see it behind me. This has stood through everything our city's been through in the last 100 years. And it's barely standing this morning. And there were also dozens of firearms looted from at least one gun store. Businesses like Red Door, Humble Coffee, Filling Phillies, One Central, Standard Diner, all owned locally, all damaged. Under these circumstances, overall restraint, I think, was shown, and I am just grateful that no one was seriously injured. We are incredibly grateful for that last night. Last night was scary and dangerous for everyone involved, for protesters and for the public, and of course, it should not have been for anyone. What we saw last night in downtown was not a protest. It was not Albuquerque. Protesting is our constitutional right as Americans. We have the strongest voice when we come together and use it as one, and we express our outrage. We call for change. Hundreds of Burqueños did that yesterday. But what we saw at this intersection was not that. As your mayor, I want to acknowledge the pain and the anger, the sorrow and the frustration that we are feeling in these times. And I know here in Albuquerque, we stand with those grieving about these incidents around the nation. And we stand with those calling for justice. And we stand with those protesting. We are trying to protect the protesters. There is no way to allow a protest when there are gunshots being fired at officers and there are being buildings burnt. I believe that Black Lives Matter. I believe that the city also stands with Black Lives Matters. We stand in solidarity with our African American community who are grieving at the reoccurring violence that has happened against their community. We can and we must admit that we have to do this, and we can do this without violence on our own city and without more violence on each other. Our police department works to protect freedom of speech. They enable demonstration. They will avoid contact and de-escalate and avoid violence in any situation other than when buildings are set on fire and when gunshots are fired at them. We have to be prepared to save lives. The protesters, the bystanders, and the lives also of our public safety and first responders. We also need to support and tolerate peaceful protests because people deserve that right. And when it rises to the level of crime, we have an obligation to keep everyone safe. Protesters, first responders, residents, businesses, all of us should not be in harm's way. Now, on top of all of this, this is still a very dangerous moment with respect to coronavirus. And like many more who've been infected because of large gatherings and all of the challenges that we're facing in our country, including the disproportionate effect of coronavirus on our communities of color, it is just more important than ever that we protect ourselves, we keep our loved ones and our neighbors as safe as we can. Now, this morning we began mobilizing city resources to try and help recover from the unfortunate events that took place last night. I want to thank the teams that stepped up to clean the streets, to board up the businesses. We're trying to offer any business who has been vandalized, we will help you board up and try and keep your business safe. We had 2 street sweepers, 4 dump trucks, dozens of blue-collar employees out here trying to fix up the chemo. We have our solid waste crews trying to clean up as much graffiti as we can. And APD is determined to reopen the streets at some point today. Now, to those out there in peaceful protest, we hear you, and we will not tolerate violence. But we absolutely welcome protest. That is the difference. That is the challenge facing America, and that's the challenge facing America in this powerful moment and Albuquerque. Now, for us, there are, of course, a number of things affecting us at this time. I want to mention it is a National Day of Prayer. It's a National Day of Prayer for the 100,000 people who have died because of Corona. And I think in any way, we should be having a day of prayer for what's happening around our country, and for George Floyd, and for everything that has been associated with all the victims before him, the victims of murder in our streets. And so for us, I do want to join around the country, and I actually do hear some bells ringing, in a moment of silence for what our country's going through, for George Floyd, and for the 100,000 people who've died with respect to the coronavirus. Please join me now. We know this has been an extremely challenging time for our community and for people across the country, and that these problems are compounded by issues of inequity, of the disproportionate effect of everything the system has done to communities of color, and also to communities struggling with poverty. I want to thank you for joining me to spend a little bit of time even here today to reflect. I also know that with the rapid spread of this virus and the scope of its impact and the racial injustices that are even further exposed by this virus, we need each other now more than ever to mourn, to lament, to remember those lives who've been taken in all of these capacities, and to fight for a better future, but to do it in a nonviolent way. Now, I want to create some space to hear from our Chief of Police. Chief Mike Geyer is going to go through some of the things that happened here, but also speak to his approach to our police department, which is an approach that had been long overdue. Our city has deep wounds and deep scars that we all know about, and we have a long, long way to go. The one difference here in Albuquerque is that we are committed to working on them. We are engaged in dialogue on this, and we're going to continue to do that, and we have to do it better and faster. Chief Mike Geyer.
Good morning. Afternoon, actually. I want to talk a little bit about the planned protest that went on last night and our response as the events went through the evening and into the early morning hours. A planned protest started around 7 p.m. last night in the area of University and Central, right by UNM. Several hundred people marched peacefully toward downtown. They were organized and orderly. They followed a truck that drove at a slow speed. APD had traffic officers leapfrogging ahead to help block traffic and protect this large group. This group marched to the roundabout at Robinson Park and eventually turned back and marched east back to UNM. There was some graffiti, but the vast majority of people marched in peace. When they reached UNM and splintered into smaller groups, the protests eventually ended at that point. Later, after midnight, we started getting reports of large gatherings downtown, probably up to 200 people. This group particularly started vandalizing businesses and actually breaking in some businesses in this area and damaging property, as you've seen this morning. Some even started small fires in dumpsters and eventually placed these in the intersections. APD at that point deployed its emergency response teams to a large portion of downtown to stop people who were vandalizing property and starting to cause violence. Roving crowds at that point moved up and down Central between 1st and 8th Street, and they also moved north and south between Copper and Silver. Some people threw bottles and other items at the police. Some climbed up on the rooftops as well and threw items down at people down at the street. After a few hours, probably around 3:30 or so, shots were fired in this vicinity right here on Central in front of the Chemo Theater. Fortunately, nobody was injured. Shortly after that, several individuals started breaking windows at the Chemo and entered this historic building. Some even made it to the roof. There was a sincere fear that they were going to start a fire in this historic building. Fortunately, several police units were able to move in quickly to stop the action and save this building from further damage. As vehicle traffic slowed in the area and additional police units were called in, the emergency response teams were able to gain control and eventually end the violence. Another group shortly again arrived and attempted to force a confrontation with police. Officers stood their ground and attempted to de-escalate the situation. That group eventually left. I want to point out that our officers once again stepped up to serve the community during this tense and uncertain situation. We are very clear and support the desire for many people in our community to peacefully protest. As a police department, we want to protect people so they can safely carry out their constitutional rights and express their opinions. In order to keep the community safe, it is also our duty to monitor these large gatherings and uphold the law. Our goal is to support peaceful protest. We saw that again Sunday evening with hundreds of people taking action and doing so in a peaceful way. When people marched downtown last evening and back to UNM, it was a challenge for us to keep them safe. But it all worked out in everybody's best interest. Everyone appeared to be rightfully proud of our city. But once again, we saw another large group come out after the protest. They intended to do damage and hurt people, including taking attacks on police. We saw some of the same people who tried to incite violence last week show up again overnight downtown. Our officers took on a very difficult challenge to stop these offenders and limit what could have been even more damage or possibly even loss of life. At one point, someone shot at the officers. That's the ultimate, there's a breaking point for everybody at that point. Everybody's at risk, and we're all worried about the worst possible consequences. We were very fortunate that we had no serious injuries. We do ask for everyone to be cognizant of our safety mission and discourage illegal activity, violence, and damage to property. The community is uniting to speak out against racism and brutality that occurred in Minneapolis. We also need the support of our neighbors locally to protect this great city. I thank you for your support, and we're going to turn this over to Deputy Chief Medina for some more commentary. Thank you.
Now I want to bring up our CAO. She is the woman who is fundamentally the civilian in charge of the city and has been also the civilian lead on our DOJ efforts to reform our police department. And so I'm going to invite up Sarita Nair. We'll keep working on the mic here to make sure we can hear, but you don't just hear wind. Sarita.
Thank you, Mayor. How's the mic?
Just start talking.
Yes, sir. Okay, great. Thanks. So 2 years ago, nearly to the day, I addressed the federal court in the Department of Justice matter. At that time, June 2018, we were 6 months into our administration. I reported that we had made a great many changes, including changing the leadership and creating a dedicated compliance bureau, changing the way we did internal affairs investigations. We were embracing data instead of fumbling with it. And I said that most importantly, we have changed the city's and the department's attitude toward the DOJ and the monitoring team,
Sorry, just trying to talk louder. We'll turn this down.
who were once considered to be our opposition, to treat them as our partners in transforming the police department. Since that time, we have made even more positive changes, including completely overhauling the way we treat use of force. But one thing still holds true. The most arduous piece of this journey is the need for culture change. At the time, I quoted James Baldwin, who said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And here's the good news. We turned to face the issues related to police brutality in our city years ago. The events in Minneapolis did not set us on a new course. They reaffirmed that we need to continue to grind away at the work that we have been doing. But the events of the last week also underscored the frustration that the change is not happening fast enough. There are days when I feel it. There are days when I know the chief feels it. The urgency to make our community stronger and to build trust. The pain of the setbacks and missteps and everything that sets us in a different direction. I believe that the protesters all along the continuum of peacefulness share many of our goals and how we want the world to look. We share frustration in the speed of progress, although we express that frustration differently. But I firmly believe that if we disagree with how that frustration is expressed, it ultimately means we all just need to work harder to create the change that we know needs to happen in our city. Some of the things we're already doing on this side are anti-racism training for all city employees, including all APD officers, and that begins in the police academy. The EPIC program, Ethical Policing is Courageous, which encourages the type of behavior, that discourages the type of behavior that we saw in Minneapolis, one of the most heartbreaking scenes. That officer of color who turned his back as another officer killed a man on the streets. EPIC is about not turning your back if you see that kind of behavior. Community policing, of course, we talk about that every day, but it is a daily journey. It is building and rebuilding those relationships. Our Human Rights Board, which is active and representative of our community for the first in a long time, actually meeting later this week to talk about these very issues related to racial healing. Our Office of Equity and Inclusion, led by Michelle Melendez, who has been actively engaged in trying to make sure that we are meeting with and hearing from the folks who are protesting on the ground. And our Civil Rights Office, led by Tori Jacobus, from whom you heard last week, and who is encouraging everyone to report civil rights violations to her office. That even extends to lighting up our underserved neighborhoods who have not had the peace and safety of adequately lit streets and alleys. It extends to caring for the homeless and other vulnerable populations during this COVID pandemic. And the $1 million in grants that we just put out 2 weeks ago to do outreach to those most vulnerable communities. If a riot is the language of the unheard, I want to be clear that we have been here listening, learning, and engaging in police reform since the day the mayor took office, and we want to continue to hear those messages. We won't overpromise, because that just erodes trust, but we will have an honest conversation about where we are and where we are going. We need to come together in a way that respects all of the pain and frustration, but it must be in a way that doesn't endanger lives. Now, I know there's been a national conversation about riots and whether cities are valuing property over human life. We have deliberately chosen not to take that approach. But events like last night did endanger more than just property. 33 fires in the downtown area endanger lives. Shooting on an open street on the corner that you're looking at endangers lives. I also want to acknowledge the business owners who were the victims of crime last night. We are here to help, and Chief Operating Officer Lawrence Rael will talk about that in more detail. But the double whammy of COVID and civil unrest is painful and is its own type of injustice. I know that many of you have given your whole lives to making this town stronger and better, and we will continue to stand and work with you toward that same goal. As a non-Black person of color and as the mother of an African-American child, I'm heartbroken every single day anew, and I'm in a state of constant prayer. And the only way that I get through to survive and get up the next morning and engage in this work is to realize that all we can do is work harder to build the world and the city that I think most of us agree that we want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarita Nair, our CAO. I want to talk a little bit about Corona. I know, as I mentioned, in some ways these things are very related, in some ways they're different. Our COO is going to walk through some of this, but I want to mention that thanks to the dedication historically over the last few months, we are opening up today, as a reminder, in many ways in terms of restaurants all across the state. The city is also beginning to open facilities such as libraries, swimming pools, things of that nature. They're all in a limited fashion, but you can see that we've earned the right to do this because we actually have some of the best rates in the country in terms of spread and so forth. We are one of the few green states in the country, and so now it's time for us to begin to open up slowly in a safe way. So as we begin in this new phase, I want to remind folks it's still very imperative that we try and stay home, that we wear face coverings, and follow all the health precautions. With more on this, our COO, Lawrence Rael.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Mayor. First and foremost, you heard a while ago the sound of a skill saw cutting through some lumber as our downtown businesses began to make repairs to their buildings that were vandalized as a result of last night's activity. We have reached out to all of our downtown businesses, and I will say this publicly to those of you who are from the business community, that the city is willing to step up to help with assuming the cost of boarding up windows that have been broken as a result of the activities last night. If any business owners would want to take advantage of that opportunity to have our crews and our contractors repair the windows, please call 311 and the city will have the contractors and our crews come out and help you with repairs to those windows. The most important part of this endeavor for the city is to ensure that our business community continues to thrive downtown, and during these challenging times, it may seem difficult, but it's certainly part of our desire to ensure that that we continue to make Albuquerque a great place. Let me begin by talking a little bit about what's next for city facilities and services as it relates to COVID-19 and what is now, as part of the governor's executive order, what will be opening up this week, and as we move to the next couple of weeks, how the city will respond to those. So beginning today, June 1st, our summer food programs will begin. The cafes at the golf courses are now going to be open at 50% for in dining. So for those of you who are golf enthusiasts, you can now get your burger or your hot dog at one of the golf courses. The Environmental Health Department will begin to do inspections and continue to do inspections of food establishments, and also along with that do education about safe distancing practices and ensuring that our businesses are staying within the rules that are now required as part of the governor's executive order. Also, the Albuquerque Fire Department will be out as well, ensuring places like barbershops, etc., that have limited capacity and openings are also following the rules. And really, as part of the education process, this is new for all of us. It's new for our businesses, and we want to make sure that we're all doing the right thing for each other and for our city. June 2nd, tomorrow, the Botanic Garden will open with timed ticketing. What does timed ticketing mean? Is that we're asking our citizens to call in to get a ticket, and you will get an opportunity to visit the Botanic Garden, but in a timely manner. The idea here is to ensure that we don't have a mass gathering, if you will, of a lot of folks in one particular area of the Botanic Gardens. So please, if you'll call in, you can call 311 again to get that information, but it's time ticketing. But again, it gives all of us parents an opportunity to have something to do for our children, especially as we know that they've been probably so antsy as it relates to the summer. Also opening tomorrow with limited service are our libraries. You know, we have a great library system. Those libraries will be opening up for limited service as well, so you will be able to access some of those facilities. On June the 8th, the summer programs began at the community centers and multi-generational centers, at our parks, and many of our cultural services sites. Now remember, our summer programs will be again limited, safe distances, so that we'll have face coverings for children, face coverings for the adults and the young people that will be helping us with those programs. But that'll again begin to give an opportunity for our children to get out and get back into at least some level of marginal, if you will, level of community fun and games. Our pools will open up for lap swimming and limited lessons as well. The Balloon Fiesta Park will be open for day use, as well as the Balloon Fiesta Golf Center, which has been closed for some time. Now that will open up. On June 9th, the Tingley Beach area again will be open with free ticketing, time ticketing as well. Now that's a very challenging facility for all of us because for the city, because it's so open and it's open to the public and it's free. But again, if you will call 311, we want to make sure we don't have a lot of folks gathered and fishing around the ponds, etc., and creating an unsafe situation for each other. So, but the good news is that now that gives us another opportunity to get out and do some fun things. June 13th, the Albuquerque Rapid Transit, otherwise known as ART, will begin service in the corridor, and our Albuquerque ABQ ride system will begin to incorporate more and more routes. The 13th is a weekend, so it's a Saturday, so that will be Saturday service on Saturday and Sunday, and then on Monday, the following Monday on the 15th, we will be opening up a full service, and that includes Sun Van service as well, and getting Sun Van service to our folks that need that service. Again, later this summer, Biopark, museum, public pools, recreation and youth sports community centers, senior centers, and multi-general centers will start to open up even more so as we continue to make progress with the social distancing and as we begin to not only flatten the curve, but begin to move the curve in the right direction, which is down. We originally looked at doing time ticketing at the zoo and the museum sooner. We were hoping to get that done earlier this month, but at this point we're not opening those facilities per the governor's executive order, but we are making plans, ensuring that we're doing the right thing as we get through the time of the month. So all of this is done with COVID-safe practices. The city is already serving the public in many ways, and we observe social distancing, keeping our workers safe with the proper protective equipment, but also ensuring that we keep our community safe, the people that we serve. So our overall capacity in our buildings is still limited, and so we're asking people that if you come in or want to come to City Hall or some of our facilities, please call the respective department, try and set up a time, or try and use the phone or the internet to get those services. That'll be really helpful for everyone, and it'll keep everyone safe. And let me move on here. We will also be doing screening at our facilities on a daily basis. We've been doing that for some period of time. That will continue. That is taking temperatures and asking whether you've had any issues associated with any interactions with someone who might have been tested positive for COVID. Summer programs. The summer food program launches on Monday, June 1st. That's today. Over the years, a lot of our community, a lot of our need in our community, our children have really relied on the summer food program. We're happy to say that we're going to continue to open that today and continue to provide meals as part of our food security for our families, etc. We have 71 sites all over the city, and staff will be wearing the appropriate protective gear. There will be a lot of grab-and-go lunches so that people don't stay too long and people feel like they're getting in and out of the process quickly. What's next for summer programs? Planned summer programs on track to be phased in as we start moving more and more, and as the governor's orders get more and more flexible, we'll start providing more and more services to our community, and family and community services, cultural services, all our parks and recreation programs will start getting more and more expanded, and we will continue to ensure that we're providing more and more services to the community. Key summer program dates. Community center programs and registration. As you all know, we reported a couple of days ago that on May 11th through the 20th, we were doing registration. We have about approximately 1,200 slots that we signed up for. Registration ended last week. We will continue to move that registration as we get more and more capacity. Aquatic program registration. As you all know, you have to call up the Parks and Recreation Department. Again, call 311 if you want to get involved in the programs from the aquatics portion of our programs. Our summer programs for tennis, for Jerry Klein and Sierra Vista. Registration starts today, June 1st to June 15th. Los Altos Parks, Aquatic Park. Again, the registration starts today as well, and will continue to go through the 15th. Group lessons for swimming will be from June 15th through July 6th, as anticipation of the governor beginning to lift more and more of the restrictions. What's next for city employees? Most of our staff have already begun and will continue to begin to come into City Hall. As you know, late in March and early April, we were, per the governor's order, we sent a lot of folks to work from home. Now we're bringing folks back in slowly but surely. We'll continue to do that. Again, ensuring that all our employees are properly screened, that we have the appropriate sanitation, etc., for the equipment at their desks or whatever facilities they're on, but also ensuring that they are being safe as they relate and as they interact with the public. And before I end my comments here, I just want to reiterate the point that the mayor made, and I think it's really super important. As a native New Mexican, I grew up looking at this town and admiring the town for what it was, and for what it is, and what I know it will be. And what's so important to me is that look around this great city, look around this street. This is ours. And that means that when you have something that's yours, we all got to do our part to respect it, to build it, and that includes the people that are here, regardless of the color of their skin. And so as we move forward through these difficult times with COVID, with this situation that we're facing as it relates to Mr. Floyd and the injustice that occurred, let's all remember, we all live together. Always keep that in mind. It's an important part of our life that we always remember to take care of each other, respect each other, and give each other the opportunity to voice your own concerns, but in a peaceful and less destructive manner. Thank you.
Almost. Is this a monologue or a dialogue?
We're happy to take questions. Just letting you know we are just going to wrap up and begin to do that.
Okay.
So let me move on to really the last thing, which is just letting folks know that this is a resilient city. I was born and raised here also, and I know that no one who deeply cares about this city and the issues affecting our country also wants to harm our city. Those two things do not go together. And we need everyone to help protect each other. That means our lives, that means Black lives, that also means everyone in our city's lives. And that means especially, even if it's 2 a.m., we cannot have gunshots on our streets. Now, I also want to make sure that we are continuing to support the folks who do this day in and day out, like our city employees, and the advocates who've been working on things like these issues for decades. Now, let me, I think, close that I believe that truly we can be a role model in this area. Albuquerque has had its challenges. We have always had our challenges. We still have our challenges. But when it comes to issues around race, around injustice, we tend to actually lead America. That's one thing we have always been slightly better at. And I'm proud of that fact. And I want to stay proud of that fact. And I know our city will make us continue to be a leader with respect to other cities when it comes to social justice and combating racism and keeping our city safe. So with that, I think we're going to have questions. We'll go in, sure, and there's online questions, there's in-person questions. We'll get to them. Why don't you organize us, Jesse?
Okay, sure. We'll start with one from Zoom, and then we'll move to in-person since we have more people here. We have one question from Chris McKee at KRTV News. Given the damage to both the city and private property downtown, was EP's response appropriate, or do you feel it was too lenient?
The question is about, the response and damage, et cetera. These kinds of things, first off, we always investigate every situation like this. It's something we've been doing since the DOJ and since my administration came in. I do know that they intervened as soon as they could in a safe way that would not lead to serious injury. And so by that measure, because there was no serious injury, I am absolutely grateful.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one here from KUNM. Was anyone arrested or detained last night or this morning?
Question was about arrests and detained last night. That is a very good question. That's one that our police department's going to have to handle, and we have Deputy Chief Harold Medina here to answer that.
Last night there were two individuals arrested as part of the night's activities. Both individuals were arrested for misdemeanor crimes and were processed and booked. There was no known injuries to either of the individuals that were arrested at this point in time.
Do you have the names on those arrested?
We could get you the names of those arrested when we're done here.
Follow up with Gilbert.
Next question.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll start with in person, but I will have more from Zoom. So we'll start here and just work our way around.
I'll be super efficient with 2 questions at once. We've been talking to downtown business owners, and as you know, they've had tremendous hurdles in their way trying to attract their clientele to return to them. One of the hurdles they tell us is parking enforcement. They say that they're just being very overzealous with the very few customers that are currently here. What can you say to the downtown business owners and to downtown customers that parking will be maybe either fair or lenient?
So the question is about parking downtown, and I certainly want to share with everyone we're happy to work with the business owners on that, and we absolutely want to be fair. I think we usually are very lenient, and so we have a regular meeting with the downtown businesses, that Project Echo, and so I'd say bring it up in Project Echo, and I'm sure our team can actually work together on that. That's a problem we can fix.
Let me just throw out one more. Do you expect more riots tonight? And if so, what is the plan for APD to protect both people and property?
So the question is, what are we expecting going forward? And look, we are expecting just around the country, we're expecting many, many days of this. And I don't think tonight's going to be any different. And we will try and do the same approach, which is APD's protocol, which is to allow protesting, which is to protect protesters. And it is only to intervene in the case of violence. And that means looting, burning of buildings, gunshots, etc. And so that, again, will be our policy this evening and going forward.
There have been reports in other cities that undercover police officers are participating in some of the riots and looting, as well as people from out of state. Do you know if any of that correlates with what we're seeing here in Albuquerque?
Question is about other participants in, did you use looting or protests, either one?
Well, rioting and breaking property.
Gotcha.
Some of them are undercover police officers, as well as like people from out of town.
Yeah. So the question, I have to repeat the question for the online people. So the question is about, what are we hearing about outsiders participating in the rioting and looting and so forth? And I know this, first off, we would never, if any city employee of any stripe is engaged in any of that activity, they will be disciplined appropriately right away. I have heard 0 examples of that, like literally none. Now, in terms of out-of-towners and outsiders, we do know this seems to be happening around the country. We have no data other than social media noise, and there certainly is noise on social media of regional out-of-town groups organizing in Albuquerque and even being paid to do so. But again, as we know with social media, that may or may not be true, but we are hearing that. Yes?
Do you have any plans for a curfew or any plans to enlist the National Guard if necessary, if you deem it necessary?
Questions are about curfew and National Guard, and I will tell you we don't want to do that. We need Albuquerque's help. We are not going to do that today, and we believe that with the help of peaceful protesters and the work of our law enforcement folks, that's unnecessary at this time. Obviously, if things reach a certain point, we will not hesitate at all to do one of those two things. We don't believe we're at that point. We don't want to be at that point, and we're asking everyone to come together to keep us away from that point.
Do you have any recommendations for folks who live either on Central or very nearby Morales downtown neighborhoods to how they should approach the next few nights, considering your thinking there's going to be more of this?
You know, the question is advice for folks who live nearby in downtown. And look, the reality is, and no one ever wants to have to say things like this, but you try and remain as safe as you can. Downtown is not a place to be, or if there's civil unrest in other areas of town, you just need to avoid those areas. And also because of Corona, I mean, just with the stay home ordinance, et cetera, now is just not the time to be going out, especially at night. I want to emphasize to folks that, again, things have been peaceful and they've been powerful but peaceful up until after midnight. And so there's just a lot of wisdom to not being out late night. And that hasn't changed.
I have a question. Could Central have been shut down earlier last night? I mean, it seems like, you know, on Sunday nights, the gates come out to stop the cruisers. But last night, definitely a great peaceful protest. Witnessed it firsthand. But after the protesters went back to UNM, you know, Central was left unregulated. And there was a lot of things going on down here. I'm just wondering if we could have stepped in earlier to shut down Central to prevent what happened after midnight.
It's a good question. The question is about, you know, Central and some of the tactics and timing around closing and so forth. I think the best thing to do is probably let APD address a little bit of that. But I would just say that, you know, we want to respect the right to protest. And so we don't know where the protest is going next. And so you got to be very careful about, again, respecting the right to protest. They will come through downtown, whether it's shut down or not, in that situation. So, but that's really a good one for law enforcement to speak to.
Thank you, Mayor. Every demonstration that we have, we always have lessons learned. And one of the things that we've learned consistently from Thursday night to last night is the vehicle aspect is bringing new dimensions into our demonstrations and the after activities that we haven't seen in the past. And tonight we do have a contingency plan that if there is some kind of demonstration where it's at, we are going to be working on a traffic control plan to limit the number of vehicles, because it seemed as last night that once we got the vehicles cleared out, it was probably within half an hour to an hour that we were able to control Central again and get things back to normal and kind of bring the tensions down. So we do realize that there are lessons learned, and those are one of those lessons is that we are going to work harder on restricting vehicle traffic for a number of reasons. It brings in people who can quickly leave, do something wrong, leave. And the other thing is it does present a danger to all those individuals who are on foot. So that is definitely something that was incorporated into any plan for tonight or any other plan for the rest of this period of time that we're going through. Thank you.
So folks, we have quite a few questions to get to for the folks who joined us virtually. So we'll go to those first. If members of the community have questions after that, we'll go to that after that. So this one comes from Matt Grubbs. As I understand it, under the multi-agency agreement that investigates shootings by police officers, the agency to which the officer belongs is also the lead agency in the investigation. Can you spend some time speaking about how or why that's considered a best practice?
The question is about investigations that occur of APD and sort of which agency does that and so forth. Our CAO, Sarita Nair, can speak to that. I do want to mention that our police department is one of the most overseen and publicly held accountable departments in the country. And again, that's in large part because of the DOJ consent decree, also because of our approach. And so we are able to provide direct answers to that.
So thank you. So the question was, under the current policy, when there's a multi-agency initiative, it is the policy that the lead agency is the one that leads any investigation related to those operations. That's accurate, and it's part of the consent decree, so none of these are decisions that we make lightly or on our own, and they all require federal court approval to change. We'd be happy to go into a little more depth on that because it's a big question, but we got people out here sweltering who are waiting to ask questions, so I think we should go to that first.
Next question from KUNM's Ty Bannerman. Do you know anything more about the shots fired outside the chemo, where they came from, or whether they were lethal rounds?
The question is about, do we know anything about the shots fired and, you know, the type of shots and so forth? All shooting incidents are under review, and we always share the results with that. At this point, this early in the morning, I don't have those details. Unless Chief Medina unless he has more.
You know, what we do know about the shots fired is that we did get an alert that there were shots fired right at the chemo. So we had indications that the shots were fired there. Officers did not discharge any firearms or shoot back, as they did not know where the shots were coming from or what direction. So as of right now, we have no investigative leads as to who the individual was and where exactly they were firing from.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Final question from here, and then we'll go to the community.
Okay.
Here. Chris McKee from KRQE, do you have any dollar estimate on the total damage to the city and or private property from last night?
Questions about the dollar estimate damage and so forth. And again, at this point, we don't have an estimate on that. We're 8 hours away from when this happened or something like that. So we'll certainly at some point have that information available. Sure.
Okay. As a black American, also a Marine, 6 years. I moved to Albuquerque. Well, we moved to Albuquerque about 4 years ago. I love the city, okay? But my question is this. I grew up in New York City in the 1960s. So what we're seeing now is not something new, to the fabric of our nation, okay? Not just against black Americans, but against all minorities, okay? So my question is this. Here in Albuquerque, because this is where I live now and I'm asking the question, is there anything in place with the police department for education against distress tolerance, for conflict resolution, further education that we can actually quantify the results of saying that we're doing a better job in this particular city, okay? And that's something that we can utilize across the nation. Because without those things start to fall in place, it's not going to be any changes, okay? If we don't change the mindsets, if we don't change the hearts, if we don't have prayer, there's not going to be any changes, all right? So that is my question.
So I am so glad you asked that question. It's one that we want people to ask us every day. And we have some answers, so I also want to answer your question directly. And there was a lot in there for folks who couldn't hear it about restorative justice, about all sorts of programs with respect to tolerance, anti-racism training, I'm paraphrasing, cultural competency, de-escalation. We actually at the city have begun to walk a road that is putting us ahead of many other cities, but we have a long way to go. And our CAO, Sarita Nair, can speak exactly to those.
Thank you, sir. Again, so your question was first, having served in the Marines, being an African American, there's people who can't see you on this format, and then also having lived in New York in the 1960s and having seen this struggle continue over all those years. What programs do we have in place, as the mayor said, to address these various issues? So, as the mayor said, we're on the beginning of the road on some of these, and we're a little further on some others. Anti-racism training is something that we established by executive order for the entire city, and including special units in the Albuquerque Police Academy. It is in process, and we also know that one training doesn't change the world. It has to be a lived practice. It has to be a practice and a behavior that we continue to reward and encourage when we see positive examples, and that we continue to call out and when appropriate, discipline when we see negative examples. Now, as for de-escalation, that's where we're a little further ahead. So de-escalation was a key part of the consent decree, and our crisis intervention unit training has actually become that model for the rest of the country, as you asked about, where we're learning, all of our officers are trained in some level of crisis intervention, but we also have special units that have additional training and have really become at the forefront of what we do. In addition, we have teams that include social workers, mental health workers, and officers who respond to certain situations to try to de-escalate, because those of you who are here know well, a big reason the DOJ is here is because of our interactions with the community that has mental and behavioral health challenges. So that's one area where we're a little further along. Also, we are constantly looking to other cities to see what they're doing that we should bring here. So Michelle Melendez, who is our head of our Office of Equity and Inclusion, she is part of a national network. She was actually selected to be a fellow in a very wonderful network of other people with her job leading offices of equity and inclusion, and we're constantly sharing best practices and incorporating them into our city to address exactly what you're talking about.
Can I ask you one more question, ma'am? Okay, so me as a civilian living in this city, how can I work with the police department to help that come about? From a civilian standpoint, working with no oversight, I'm not interested in all of that. Just how can I help with the police department to spread that message and to get it out throughout the communities?
Thank you, sir. The question was, how as a civilian can one work with the police department to get out and spread that message? And I've got a couple answers for that. One is, if you want to be engaged in some of the formal processes, our community policing councils are exactly that place where civilians come in each area command to discuss the issues that are going on in that area and to foster those community policing efforts. We always need more members, and frankly, we need more diverse membership in those CPCs. And so we welcome anyone in the city who wishes to be engaged to apply. You can get that online through the CIBQ website. Also, you know, our police department is always looking for volunteers in different areas. We have the 1ABQ volunteer. Again, there's a website, there's a place where you can sort of interact, send your name in, and then we can give you other opportunities to volunteer. And then I think also just any time we're in these conversations, I would just encourage folks to just pick up the phone, call 311 or call, you know, come to your city council meeting, but interact in those ways, because we're constantly talking about these efforts, but it's really hard to talk about the good news sometimes. And so we would just love to see everyone more engaged in all the parts of civic life where we're able to tell some of those more positive stories, so that sort of creates a ripple effect and a domino effect of that positivity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions there, and you can go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. And if there's further questions, of course, just call the usual channels or check in with 311. And we ask everyone, no matter what you're doing, whether it's protesting or it's staying at home, let's all just try and keep each other safe tonight. Thank you.